when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was unceremoniously ejected from a courtroom on live television. The world saw a defiant politician. What they didn't see was the strategic mastermind quietly building a mountain of evidence that would expose a corrupt federal judge and ignite a movement for justice. Jasmine was thrown out of a courtroom on live TV for challenging a federal judge. But what the cameras didn't show was the mountain of evidence she'd been building to bring that same judge down. Are you seriously going to pretend that's justice? The words cut through the heavy silence of Courtroom 3B in the Edward R. Royal Federal Building in downtown Los Angeles. Jasmine Crockett, wearing a dark navy pantsuit and eyes that didn't flinch, was standing, not seated like most attorneys or officials would be. Instead, she stood tall, both physically and morally, in front of a judge who didn't expect resistance, let alone from her. Judge Belinda Moxley didn't lift her gaze right away. She just pressed her lips together and stared at the stack of papers in front of her. She'd been sitting on that bench for 18 years, long enough to feel untouchable. "You're out of line," the judge said finally, her voice tight and calculated. "And you're out of control," Crockett replied, her voice steady, almost too calm. "You've ignored precedent, silenced my client, and now you're trying to bury this like every other complaint that's crossed your desk." The courtroom froze. The public gallery sat stiff, unsure whether to look at the judge, at Jasmine, or at the bailiff who'd already started shifting in place. A court officer whispered something into a radio clip to his chest. The air wasn't tense, it was suffocating. "Remove her," Judge Moxley ordered, raising her voice just enough to echo across the courtroom. "Now!" Jasmine didn't move. She looked at the young man sitting behind her, her client, whose entire case had just been dismissed before closing arguments. He looked like he wanted to sink into the floor, a man who had trusted the system and watched it spit him out. Two U.S. Marshals approached. "I'll walk," Jasmine said. "Don't touch me." The bailiffs hesitated, then let her lead herself out, but she didn't go quietly. As she passed the gallery, she spoke one final line loud enough for the live stream mic to catch it. "Mark my words, this isn't over." And just like that, within minutes, clips started hitting Twitter, TikTok, and cable news panels. "Congresswoman removed from courtroom." Banners ran across screens coast to coast. Pundits debated courtroom decorum, and legal Twitter exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett was right and hashtag Judge Moxley trended by mid-afternoon. But what viewers didn't know was that this wasn't just about one bad decision or a rude exchange in court. Jasmine had known this day was coming. In fact, she'd been preparing for it, though not like this. At home that night, Jasmine sat in her kitchen, lights off, scrolling through reactions on her phone. One clip had been viewed over 3.2 million times, and she recognized her own voice playing back again and again like a war cry. The internet loved her fire, yet they didn't know the cost. Her phone buzzed, a text from someone she hadn't heard from in over a year. "I saw what happened. You were right to push. Call me. It's time." Jasmine stared at the message. She didn't smile, nor did she feel vindicated. If anything, she felt the weight of something bigger settling on her chest. This wasn't viral fame. This was war, but this time, she wasn't walking in empty-handed. Jasmine Crockett didn't sleep that night. By 6:15 a.m., her kitchen table in Baldwin Hills was covered in folders, Post-it notes, and two half-drunk mugs of cold coffee. A notepad sat in front of her full of scribbled names and page numbers. There was no legal assistant, no intern, no campaign aide, just her in a cotton hoodie, glasses slipping down her nose, and a look in her eyes that meant business. At 7:02, she picked up the phone and dialed. "You really up?" The voice on the other end was raspy, a little amused. "I haven't slept either. You ready to go nuclear?" "Not yet," Jasmine said, "but I need everything we had on Moxley from last year. The internal memos, the sealed order from 2019, and the complaint from that housing fraud case in Flagstaff." There was a pause. "That file's still locked." "Then unlock it. You realize what happens if this leaks before you're ready." "Then we don't leak it," Jasmine said. "We build it carefully." She hung up. People assumed Jasmine was just a congresswoman who liked TV cameras and viral clapbacks. However, what most forgot or never knew was that before politics, She had spent 10 years as a defense attorney, grinding through broken systems and worse judges. Moxley was the kind who made you question the point of fighting. The first time Jasmine crossed paths with her was 5 years ago in a probate case involving an elderly black veteran whose estate had been swallowed by legal loopholes. Moxley had dismissed the petition in under 7 minutes, and Jasmine had walked out of that courtroom stunned. Not by the decision. She'd seen plenty of bad ones, but by how fast it happened, like Moxley had made her mind up before even hearing the argument. Later, she found out that Moxley had signed off on nearly every motion filed by a particular law firm, a firm with deep ties to a local real estate syndicate. That's when Jasmine started paying attention, and what she found was a trail. Cases tossed with no explanation, unpublished rulings, sealed settlements, complaints dismissed or delayed for procedural issues, and whispers from court clerks who didn't want their names used. Moxley had been protected for years by the weight of the bench and the silence of those around her. Until now. At 8:11 a.m., Jasmine met with Quinn Olston in a rented office space off Southwestern Avenue. Quinn was a former court interpreter who'd quit after an incident involving Judge Moxley in 2021. Quinn wasn't sure she wanted to talk. "You know, she threatened me, right?" Subtle, but it was there. She told me, "If you're planning to stir trouble, just remember how small this city really is." Jasmine folded her hands. "I know, and I wouldn't ask you to speak if I didn't think it mattered." Quinn sighed. She bent cases. Everyone knows it, but no one says a thing because she always leaves just enough room for doubt. "She's smart. She's calculated," Jasmine corrected. "That's different." Quinn looked down at her lap, then slowly reached into her bag. "I kept this. I wasn't supposed to, but it never sat right with me." She handed over a transcript, an unofficial one, of a closed-door evidentiary hearing from 2 years ago. A woman named Celeste Rateria had tried to testify in a land seizure case only to be denied the floor mid-sentence. The transcript showed Moxley interrupting, overruling the lawyer, then adjourning the hearing within 5 minutes. Jasmine's heart started pounding. Quinn whispered, "That's the day I quit, and the day I realized she's not just careless, she's dangerous." Jasmine held the transcript in her hands like a live wire. It wasn't just a piece of evidence. It was proof. Not enough to win a case yet, but enough to start one. However, if she was going to bring Moxley down, she needed more than whispers and paperwork. She needed the voices behind them to stand up. 2 days after the courtroom incident, Jasmine Crockett sat in the back of a small cafe on Crenshaw Boulevard with her phone face down and a manila folder in her lap. The cafe was half empty, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and regulars knew to mind their own business. Across from her sat Rosalind DeWitt, not a lawyer, not a politician, but a former judicial assistant who'd worked under Moxley for almost 4 years. Rosalind looked nervous. Her hands kept reaching for the ceramic mug of tea in front of her, but she hadn't taken a sip since they sat down. She kept 2 sets of notes, Rosalind said, her eyes scanning the room behind Jasmine's shoulder. One for the court record, one for herself. Jasmine leaned forward, careful not to pressure. "Personal notes?" Rosalind nodded. She had this leather-bound planner she never let anyone touch. Wrote in it every day. Sometimes it was stuff about lawyers she didn't like. Sometimes it was stuff about the litigants' race, attitude, even who they came in with. She kept score. Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, but something about the quiet way Rosalind said it made the hair on her arms rise. "Why didn't you speak up before?" Jasmine asked. "I tried," Rosalind said quickly. "I filed an internal complaint. It went nowhere. No call back, no follow-up. A month later, my workload doubled, and I started getting called in for random audits. I quit after 3 months." Jasmine reached into the folder and pulled out a copy of Rosalind's complaint. "I got this from a friend in D.C. It was buried, marked incomplete." It wasn't. Rosalind blinked. "So, they're protecting her or protecting themselves," Jasmine said. "No one wants to be the first to admit they missed the warning signs. It's easier to say there weren't any." Rosalind let out a slow breath and finally took a sip of her tea. "If you're going after her, you'll need more than this." "I know," Jasmine replied, but you're the second person in 48 hours who's told me the same kind of story, and I haven't even knocked on all the doors yet." Later that evening, Jasmine sat in her car outside a courthouse in Riverside, watching from a distance. She wasn't stalking anyone. She was waiting. A clerk named Brady, a friend of a friend, had offered to meet her after hours. He didn't want to be seen talking in public. He slid into the passenger seat without a word and handed her a flash drive. "What's on this?" she asked. "Sealed dockets from 2020 through 2023. 39 total. All cases assigned to Moxley. Most of them ended without explanation. No judgments, no hearings, just sealed." Jasmine looked at him, unsure how he even had access. Brady answered her. "Look, let's just say some clerks keep souvenirs. You understand this could get you fired." "I already asked to be transferred to a civil branch," he said. "If anyone finds out, I'll deny it, but someone needs to blow the whistle, and no one's better positioned than you." Jasmine stared at the flash drive. It was small, almost weightless. Yet in the right hands, it could knock down a pillar that had stood untouched for nearly 2 decades. The weight of the moment sat between them in silence. Brady got out of the car as quickly as he had entered, and Jasmine was alone again. Back home, she plugged the flash drive in her laptop. File names appeared, dozens, some familiar. One stood out, a wrongful death case involving a man named D'Angelo Price. She remembered his mother begging the press to look deeper, crying outside the courthouse when reporters walked past her. Jasmine opened the file. What she read made her stop breathing for a moment. Testimonies were cut short, medical records were ignored, and a security camera video listed in the evidence log was never entered into the court record. And then right there at the bottom of the final page, case sealed by order of Judge B. Moxley. But now Jasmine had more than a hunch. She had patterns, people, and proof. And that meant Moxley was no longer protected by silence. Jasmine didn't cry easily, but she had to step away from the screen. It wasn't just the number of cases. It was the way they had been handled. Quiet suppressions, decisions made in the dark, lives that had been permanently altered or erased under the gavel of a woman who rarely faced pushback. The deeper Jasmine dug, the more it looked less like incompetence and more like strategy. She knew the next step had to be airtight. On Wednesday morning, she booked a meeting with Josephine Kleen, a legal analyst and former federal prosecutor who had been quietly working on judicial reform in California. They met at an office near downtown Pomona, a law library that smelled like ink and old carpet, the kind of place where big cases begin and end with footnotes. Jasmine laid out her findings one by one. The transcript from Quinn, the flash drive from Brady, the old complaint from Rosalind, and sealed case after sealed case. Josephine didn't interrupt once. When Jasmine finished, Josephine leaned back in her chair and said, "That's more than enough to file." "I'm not trying to make noise," Jasmine replied. "I'm trying to end her. Then you'll need someone who worked those cases, a name, a face, someone who lost everything because of her." Jasmine nodded slowly. "I've got someone in mind." She made a few calls, left a few voicemails. No one answered at first. Then her phone rang, a blocked number. "Is this Crockett?" the voice on the line asked. "Yes, this is Celeste Rateria." Jasmine straightened her chair. "I heard from someone that you've been asking questions. I didn't think anyone would remember my name." "I do," Jasmine said, "and I remember how your case ended or didn't." Celeste agreed to meet her that evening at a diner near Victorville. Jasmine drove 2 hours to get there. Celeste was already sitting in a booth when she arrived. Late 30s, tired eyes, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked like someone who hadn't had a good night's sleep in years. "My case cost me everything," she said before Jasmine could even speak. "The land was my family's, my grandmother's. Moxley handed it off to developers like we didn't even matter." Jasmine sat down. "I have your transcript. I have other seal files too, but I need you, your voice. Not just for the complaint, for the record. An affidavit." Celeste stared at her, jaw tight, eyes shining. "I've tried to move on. I really did. But I see her face every time I pass that courthouse like she got to just live. And we were left picking up scraps." "She's done it to more people than you," Jasmine said gently. "But you could be the reason she doesn't get to do it again." Celeste took a shaky breath. "What if they say I'm lying?" "We don't let them. The next day, Celeste submitted a signed affidavit to Josephine's office. In it, she detailed how her testimony was silenced, how key evidence disappeared, and how Moxley made a comment off record that stuck with her for years. She told me, "Some people get lucky with property, others lose it trying to pretend it belongs to them." It was there in writing, and with Celeste's statement, the flash drive, the transcripts, and a timeline of judicial irregularities that stretched over a decade. Jasmine was finally ready. She printed the full complaint, 86 pages, and reviewed every line 3 times. She didn't add her name for show. Instead, she added it because she meant every word. Congresswoman or not, she was walking into the fire. The filing went public through the Judicial Conduct and Disability Office in San Francisco. By noon, it was circulating in legal circles. Then court watchers picked it up, followed by the press, and finally the public. Judge Belinda Moxley was no longer just a name in a headline. She was the subject of a federal complaint backed by evidence, testimonies, and a woman who had no intention of backing down. However, filing a complaint and watching it shake the system are 2 very different things, and Jasmine knew the real storm was just beginning. The official complaint hit the wire Thursday morning at 9:14 a.m. Jasmine Crockett didn't hold a press conference. She didn't tweet, nor did she alert a single journalist ahead of time. She let the document speak for itself, and it did. 86 pages long, with allegations of ethical breaches, judicial bias, abuse of discretion, and case suppression. It was backed by 8 affidavits, 6 sealed case records, and 3 documented complaints previously marked unsubstantiated by the court's own internal review team. Within the hour, calls started flooding into the Capitol office, and D.C. reporters, legal analysts, talk show producers, morning news anchors, everyone wanted a soundbite, yet they got silence. At 11:30, Jasmine walked into a small legal podcast recording studio in Culver City, Justice Over Coffee, run by 2 law school grads with a growing audience and 0 corporate sponsors. "You're going to talk to us?" one of the hosts asked, surprised. "You asked the right question," Jasmine replied. Not what happened, but why it kept happening. The interview dropped that night, with no camera crew, no network interference, just Jasmine, a mic, and a story that hadn't been told on this level. She didn't just make mistakes, Jasmine said during the taping. She made choices over and over again. Choices that hurt people who didn't have the power to fight back. And when they tried, they were ignored until now. By the next morning, the federal judiciary had acknowledged receipt of the complaint and announced a preliminary review. The judge in question, Belinda Moxley, had issued a brief statement calling the allegations baseless and politically motivated, but she didn't deny sealing the cases, nor did she deny recusing herself from 0 of them. Moreover, she definitely didn't deny the internal complaints that had vanished without a trace. That Friday afternoon, Jasmine received a phone call from Congressman Lowell Breener, chair of the House Judiciary Oversight Subcommittee. "We saw the filing," he said. "It's going to get noisy. I'm ready. You sure? Once this goes past the preliminary review, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle." "I'm not here for bottles or genies," Jasmine replied. "I'm here because she never should have been on that bench this long." Breener paused. "You might want to lay low for a bit. Moxley's friends are making calls. They've been making calls for years," she said. "Now it's my turn." Outside her office, staffers were huddled around monitors. CNN was looping the original courtroom footage the moment she got kicked out, and this time they ran alongside headlines like "Crockett files bombshell complaint against federal judge," and "Silence breaks inside the case against Belinda Moxley." The online comments were chaotic. Some accused Jasmine of grandstanding, others called her a hero, and a few said she had overstepped. She didn't care. At 3:45 p.m., her team got word that 3 additional litigants, people she'd never met, had come forward and requested to attach their names to the complaint. Their cases had also been dismissed by Moxley in prior years. One of them was a retired school teacher from Modesto, another a small business owner from Fresno, and the third, a man whose brother had died in pretrial custody after Moxley denied a motion for medical treatment. The dominoes were falling. That night, Jasmine sat alone on her balcony. The sun was slipping behind the LA skyline, and for the first time all week, she let herself breathe. She wasn't naive. The system had ways of protecting itself. People like Moxley didn't just crumble overnight. There would be calls behind closed doors, efforts to discredit her, and quiet warnings passed around to anyone brave enough to speak out. But something had shifted. People were watching now, not just her, but the system itself. The cracks were showing, and Jasmine wasn't waiting for permission anymore. And with every name that came forward, the wall around Moxley was getting smaller. On Monday morning, Judge Belinda Moxley didn't show up for court. Her docket was reassigned. There was no official explanation, no apology to the families whose hearings were postponed, and no statement from the courthouse press office, just a locked door and a closed calendar. By noon, federal investigators had arrived at the courthouse to begin their inquiry. Jasmine Crockett didn't celebrate, nor did she post a victory message or appear on primetime news. Instead, she returned to the same law office in Pomona, where she'd reviewed the files just days earlier. This time, she was meeting with attorneys from the Judicial Accountability Initiative, a group that rarely made headlines but did the kind of work that changed systems quietly. Josephine Clean was already there, skimming through a stack of documents. She didn't look up as Jasmine walked in. "They've opened a formal ethics review," she said flatly. "It's happening." Jasmine sat across from her, set down her phone, and waited. "She's being investigated under Article 3 guidelines. If the review finds misconduct, she could face suspension. If there's enough for impeachment proceedings, well, that's never been done in this district before." "I'm not asking for precedent," Jasmine said. "I'm asking for accountability." Josephine nodded once. "Then you got what you came for." However, the process wasn't smooth. Within days of the review announcement, 3 op-eds appeared in major California newspapers defending Moxley's record. Anonymous sources from the legal community called the complaint a political stunt, and a former colleague went on air claiming Jasmine had weaponized identity politics. Meanwhile, a swarm of online harassment targeted the individuals who had come forward in the affidavit. Celeste Retiria's business page was flooded with negative reviews, and Rosalind received 2 threatening emails. Even Brady, the clerk who had given Jasmine the flash drive, found his tire slashed outside his apartment. Jasmine addressed it all in one post. Just text, no hashtags. Silencing people is how this mess started. Don't expect us to go quiet now. Behind the noise, the wheels kept turning. One of the sealed cases, the wrongful death of D'Angelo Price, was reopened under emergency review, and the judge assigned to it issued a public statement acknowledging serious irregularities in the original proceedings. An internal memo from 2021 surfaced, showing that Moxley had been warned by a colleague about her dismissive tone toward lower-income litigants. But what truly shifted public opinion came during a live hearing held by the Judicial Review Panel. Celeste Retiria took the stand. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled as she held the microphone. She recounted how her family's property was taken, how she was told she didn't have a legal claim, and how Judge Moxley looked her in the eye and said, "Some people don't know when they're out of their depth." The room was silent. Even the panelists stopped scribbling notes. Later that evening, every major outlet ran the clip, and it wasn't just about one judge anymore. It had become a story about what happens when people speak and no one listens, until one person refuses to stay silent. Jasmine watched the coverage from a quiet room in her office. She didn't smile, nor did she gloat. She just sat there, hands clasped, watching as the story left her hands and became something bigger. Across the country, court employees started submitting anonymous tips about similar abuses in other districts, and a hotline created by the Judicial Accountability Initiative received over 300 calls in 48 hours. Even people who had been skeptical in the beginning began to shift. She made a lot of people uncomfortable, one anchor said during a legal roundtable, but maybe that's exactly what we needed. Yet, Jasmine knew this wasn't the end, because real justice isn't just removing one person. It's changing the structure that let them stay that long in the first place. A week after the hearing, Jasmine Crockett stood outside the Clara Shortridge Falls Criminal Justice Center in downtown LA, not for a press event or an interview, but just to watch. Courtroom doors opened, and people stepped out, papers in hand, some smiling, some numb. Lawyers paced, and families waited. It was just another day in the system. But for Jasmine, it felt different now. Not fixed, not cleaned up, just exposed. Her phone rang, and she let it buzz. This moment wasn't for headlines. This moment was to remember what it cost to get here and how many voices it took to finally be heard. Later that evening, she visited Celeste Rateria at her new office space, a small real estate consultancy she'd reopened in El Monte. Celeste offered her a chair and a soda from an old mini fridge in the corner. "I figured you'd be off saving the next courthouse," Celeste joked lightly. Jasmine cracked a grin. "I might take a week to breathe first." Celeste sat across from her, more at ease than Jasmine had ever seen her. "You know, when I first met you, I thought this was just another show. Another politician chasing noise. And now I know you came back for the people the system forgot." Jasmine didn't reply right away. She looked around the room. Mismatched furniture, a corkboard full of neighborhood flyers, handwritten checklists taped to the wall. Nothing flashy, but it was hers, and it existed because someone had listened. "You ever wonder how many other judges are out there doing the same thing?" Celeste asked quietly. "All the time," Jasmine replied. "But you don't take the whole mountain at once. You chip at the base. Make it shake." Celeste smiled. "Well, you definitely made it shake." The investigation into Judge Moxley continued through the month. She was temporarily suspended pending further review, and rumors of a resignation circulated, but nothing official had been filed. Jasmine didn't care much for the final act. Whether she stepped down or was pushed didn't matter, for what mattered was the door she'd opened and the fear now sitting behind other benches across the country. In the following weeks, Jasmine was invited to panels, asked to headline justice forums, and offered multiple TV deals. However, she declined all of them. Instead, she returned to doing what she had always done best: listening, lawyering, and fighting when no one else would. Because this story was never about fame, it was about reminding people that courage doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing alone in a courtroom refusing to sit down. Sometimes it looks like someone who's tired of watching people suffer quietly. And sometimes it looks like a fight you didn't plan for, but one you were born to finish. If there's anything to take from what Jasmine did, it's this: power protects itself until someone refuses to play by the rules, and silence holds up systems until one voice cracks it wide open, and ultimately, justice isn't delivered, it's demanded.